Hello, today we will be looking at equations for parallel and perpendicular lines. To understand the information contained in this video, you should understand how to form an equation of a line. And if you need a refresher, I will link videos below in the description for you to review. But let's look at parallel equations first because they are very easy to determine. Before we go into the math of what parallel lines are, let's understand what a parallel line is. Parallel lines are lines that do not meet. That is, two straight lines that do not intercept at any point is said to be parallel. Looking at this graph, we can see that the three lines that we have here, no matter how far you go in either direction, whether that be in this direction or this direction, they will not cross. And because of that, they are considered parallel lines. If we take a deeper dive into this graph, we can understand the similarities between two or three of these lines, with that being the slope. If we call this line A, this line B, and this line C, if we were to take line B and impose it on either A or C, we would have the exact same line because they are increasing at the exact same rate. This increase across the x and y axis is the same on both of these lines, which then tells us, again, that slope is the same. And so now that you can visually see what's going on, what does the equation tell us? And that's just that the slope of the two lines are equal. And if the slope of the lines are equal, then the two lines are parallel. And it's really that easy. If we take line A and say that the equation for line A is equal to y equals x plus 2, we know that where it intersects with the y-axis is 2. And we're asked to find an equation that is parallel to this line. And so again, we've identified that for a line to be parallel with another line, they need to have the exact same slope. So we need to identify the slope and then create an equation that has an equal slope. In this case, slope, or m, is equal to 1, which is what we get right here, because we know that the equation of the line is y equals mx plus b. And so in this case, m is equal to 1. And now that we've identified the slope of m, any equation with a slope of 1 will be parallel to line A. Say we want to look at the equation for b from the graph that intercepts at 0, so we know that the equation is going to be y equals mx plus 0 because 0 is the intercept, or that means it passes through the origin. Therefore, we can cancel that out. So we have y equals mx. Because we know and we want this line to be parallel, we already have a value of m, which makes it parallel. So therefore, this equation becomes y equals x. And this is the equation of a line that is parallel to y equals x plus 2. If we wanted to, we can go further and use c. All we'd have to do is determine the intercept. And in this case, we're just guessing because we don't actually have enough information, but let's just say it's -3. So if we know that the intercept is -3, which is this point right here, -3, we know the slope and we know the intercept, so we can write the equation for c to say y equals 1 for the slope, x minus 3 for the intercept. So this is the equation for the line of C. This was the equation for the line of B, and this is the equation for the line of A. Because the slope is the same on all three lines, we can say that all three lines are parallel to each other. Okay, let's look at another example. Looking at our next example, it says find a line through the point -3, 5 that is parallel to 5x minus 2y, which equals 4. So what we need to do first, again, is determine what the slope is of this line that we're given. And then from there, we're able to then plug in this point because this is going to be of the new line. And this will be able to form our equation. let's get this equation into a form that we're familiar with, and let's try to turn it into a y equals mx plus b, because that way we will have identified what m is, because we know that the slope of one line must equal the slope of the other line. Rearranging this equation, we're going to get negative 2y, bringing the 5 over to the other side. We get a negative 5x, and we have the 4 that's left over there. Dividing everything by negative 2, we're going to be left with y equals 5 over 2x minus 2. Now that we have this form of the equation, we know that m is equal to 5 over 2. We've now satisfied the parallel portion if we set both slopes equal to 5, 2. Now we just need to find the line. So how do we do that? Well, if we use our equation, y equals mx plus b, then we have our point, which means we know our y value, and we know our x value, and we can solve for b. Y at this point gives us 5. We have our slope at 5 over 2. We have our x value at negative 3, and we are left with b. Solving for b, we get 5 plus 15 over 2, which is equal to b. And therefore, b is equal to 12 and 1/2. All right, now that we have our slope and we have our y-intercept, we know that the equation of the line that passes through point negative 3, 5, but is parallel to 5x minus 2y equals 4 is y equals 5 over 2x and our intercept plus 12 and 1/2. And this is our equation. Okay, now that we understand how to solve for parallel lines, let's look what it means to have a line that is perpendicular to another line. Okay, what is perpendicular? Well, perpendicular is a fancy way of saying that the relationship between two lines form a 90-degree or a right angle, and that is considered perpendicular. And that's what we have here. So if we have line A and line B, we see that where they intercept is at this point here, and it creates a right angle or 90 degrees. And that's what perpendicular means. Looking at the graph, we understand that the slope of one line is going up and over, which makes it this way. And we see that the slope of the second line is actually going down and over, and it is going this way. Looking at the relationship between the two slopes, what is mathematically proven is that if you take the slope of A, so we'll say the slope of A, and we multiply it by the slope of B, then we're going to get a value of negative 1. This theorem shows a relationship between the two lines that we have and their slope. For example, if line A has the equation, and we're just going to make something up, let's say y equals a 3x minus 3. So we're saying that it crosses here at negative 3, and that the slope is 3. And because we know the slope of line A, for B, all we would need to do is use this theorem to solve for what it would be. So if we have the slope of A, we can plug that in, and that gives us 3 slope of B equals a negative 1. Solving for the slope of B, we get negative 1/3 is what the slope of B has to be for B to be perpendicular with A. So to write this equation out for B, and again, we don't know all the values of B, but we do know the slope has to be a negative 1/3, and then we'll say that the intercept is at 3, and we'll call this point 3 as well. 3. And that would be the equation for the line B. Again, what's important to note is that for two lines to be perpendicular, the slope of line 1 multiplied by the slope of line 2 must equal -1. So another way to say this is the inverse negative of the other slope will give that for you. And what do I mean by that? If we just solve for MA, for example, that's going to say MA is equal to -1 over MB. So that's the negative inverse. Or you can solve for MB and you're going to get -1 over MA. But if you don't want to think of the negative inverse, you can just know that two slopes multiplied by each other will give you that -1 value. Okay, let's look at another example. Okay, so you're given 2 points. You're given the point -3, 1 and the point 5, 4. And the question asks to find a line equal to the perpendicular bisector. From what we just reviewed, we know that perpendicular means that the slope of line 1 and the slope of line 2 must be equal, when multiplied together, should be equal to a -1. Well, what does bisector mean? Well, bisector is a fancy way of saying cuts into two equal parts. And then find a line that crosses that middle point that is perpendicular or 90 degrees to that line segment. So how do we do all that? Well, if you're not familiar with the midpoint formula, I will link a video in the description below so you can review the midpoint formula. But we can use the midpoint formula to find the bisector, and then from that, we'll be able to find the slope of the line. After we find the slope, we need to do the negative inverse. Once we have that negative inverse, we use that bisector point, and then we'll be able to solve for our line. So let's get into it. This midpoint formula just states that you take the average of your x values and the average of your y values. So you can do the midpoint is -3 plus 5 divided by 2, and we have 1 plus 4 divided by 2. This is equal to 1, and we're gaining 5 over 2. And this is equal to our midpoint. So now what we're looking for, we have the midpoint, so we have the bisector, right? Now what we need to do is find the slope. Well, we're given 2 points, so all we need to do is find what slope is. So slope of P1, P2 is equal to the change in y over the change in x. We have y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. We'll use P2 as our y2 and x2 values. So we will do a 4 here, and we'll have a 5 here, and we minus 1, and we minus a -3, which reduces down to 3 over 8. And this is our slope of P1, P2, of point 1 and point 2. Now that we know the slope of the line that goes through the point -3, 1, and 5, 4, if we want to find a line perpendicular to that using this equation, all we need to do is plug this value, 3/8, into that equation. So by doing that, we are going to do 3 over 8 multiplied by our second slope is equal to -1. And if we solve this, then we know that M2 is equal to -8 over 3. This is the slope of our line that is perpendicular to the point P1 and P2. Now what we need to do is find the equation of that line. We know the point that it's going to pass through, which is here 1 and 5 over 2, which was the midpoint of our first segment. All we need to do now is plug it into our equation y equals mx plus b, and we'll solve for b, and then we should have the equation of this line because we know y, we know x because of this point right here, and we know m because of the slope we just found that is perpendicular to the slope that we found of our points here. With that, we plug in our values. We get 5 over 2 equals, our slope is negative 8 over 3. We have our x value, which is 1, plus b. Now we solve for b. b is equal to 5 over 2 plus 8 over 3. That simplifies down to 31 over 6. And that is our equation. We can do y equals negative 8 over 3x plus 31 over 6. And this is our final answer. And this equation, this line, is a perpendicular bisector of the point negative 3, 1, 5, 4. And again, what that means is this goes through the midpoint of that segment, P1 and P2, and when intercepts, forms a 90-degree angle. And there you go. Now you understand how to find equations of lines that are parallel and perpendicular to other lines. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you learned something, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.